Okay, I'm delighted to introduce today Sina Kahen as our guest. Sina is a thought leader in conversational AI and a keynote speaker on artificial intelligence, the future of healthcare, and the links between emotions and technology. Sina, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, I had a little bit of a look at the things that you work on, and you've got a very impressive collection of things that you do. In your own words, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yes, absolutely. So it's as you said, it's quite a strange mix, but to me, it's all part of a consistent framework. So I graduated as a biomedical scientist almost a decade ago. From there, I decided I don't want to be in a lab. I wanted to be on the business side of science and technology. So I began working for D'Souza Medical, which is an orthopedic medical device company. I've been there ever since I graduated, starting in sales, going through to product management, international business development, and now corporate innovation. Then, having started my MBA a couple of years back, 3 years ago now at Imperial College, I was able to get a more holistic macro view of science, tech, and business. And that's when I started my uh, endeavors in the conversational AI, voice tech world, and really started to take a lot of the learnings I've had from medtech, science, philosophy, with regards to a lot of the philosophical initiatives that I'm involved in, and started doing a lot of public speaking, going out there speaking at a variety of events on topics that are dear to me, and of course, trying to create as many courses as I can to try and reflect those learnings and provide some of them to interested students.
For sure. And coming from such a varied background, what made you decide to kind of hone in a bit on voice tech? What attracted you to that particular area?
Yeah, so in the medtech role that I have, a lot of the time is spent on trying to think how could we improve the use of medical devices within operating rooms. So if you think of an operating room, it's sterile. So you can't really touch a lot of things. The surgeon can, the people who are scrubbed and sterile, they can. But for all intents and purposes, it's a no touch zone.
Right.
Now, looking at a lot of the devices within the operating room, try to see how can we improve the user experience of a surgeon. Voice really turned up turned out to be something quite exciting to look to.
Yeah.
And this was around 5, 6 years ago when voice wasn't commercialized anywhere near the level that it is today. That was just for a voice user interface on a medical device. Fast forward a year or two, and I started my MBA course. And on the MBA course, we were learning a lot about emerging technologies and how the brands of the future will be interacting with their customers, really. And voice kept coming up. And I only knew voice in that niche medtech context. I hadn't really thought of it in the commercial context that we all know and love. Well, a lot of us love, not so many of us love
Sure.
context today. So when I saw how it was becoming commercialized with Alexa, with obviously Siri, okay, Google, Microsoft Cortana, etc., I thought, hey, why don't I get together some of the MBA students in the cohort and set up VAICE? And VAICE, VAICE, it's essentially a group. It was pro bono, you know, glamorous work experience, I call it, where we basically went out consulting different brands from BBC to O2 to Lego, etc., on how they can develop a voice strategy. So what can they do to utilize or take benefit from this new emerging tech known as voice technology, this smart speaker? What is it that can provide utility to the brand as well as to the customer? And from there, really, VACE has grown to be a kind of home for thought leadership with regards to anything related to conversational AI and voice technology. So that's really the first forays, if you like, into the space.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. It's always enjoyable hearing people who are in a particular field, and in your case, medicine, seeing these particular use cases that probably aren't so obvious to people who are outside of those fields. I mean, was there a particular moment or flashpoint that made you think, okay, voice tech is where I should be heading, or was it just a gradual process?
So the utility of voice as an interface, that was a gradual process. Obviously, seeing an operating room, as I said, it's sterile, you can't touch everything. But being able to turn on simple things like turning on the operating room lights or getting notes from a patient database instead of having to go into it and check the key to type on the keyboard. Being able to just say, hey, what was the notes on this patient, or even interacting with certain robotic devices that are out there now. instead of, having to just utilize them, or sorry, use them via your hands, being able to interact with these devices with your voice. That was a gradual process. But when I saw voice on a more commercial, on a macro level, not this niche utility or use case within the operating room, it was when I saw a video by Professor Scott Galloway, who's a NYU professor, fantastic guy. And he was talking about how brands for decades have been spending billions on generating a visual persona, a visual image, with packaging, with logos, with branding, all of those different visual elements. And now we've got these smart speakers that is, the fastest adopted technology in history in so many homes. Brands are now having to think about their auditory
Of
persona.
course.
What do
Yeah,
they
yeah.
sound
Interesting.
like? So when I watched that video, it was like a 3-minute clip, and it's still on YouTube. Scott Galloway voice technology, something like that. I was like, damn, this is crazy, because we're going to have this whole, it's a paradigm shift where brands are going to have to start thinking, what do I sound like? Am I a man? Am I a woman? High pitched, low pitched, this, that. It's just, am I gender fluid? What am I?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is when I realized there's so many, what I liked is there were a lot of questions, but there weren't enough answers. So I thought, great, I love questions from my Jewish and philosophical tradition that I was raised in. We love questions, even though we don't always have the answers. So let's get together as a group of MBA students and write down all these questions and try to provide frameworks that will help brands achieve answers.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds like a powerful moment, having that
Yes,
realization. And as you were telling me, I was also feeling a similar realization, like how are brands going to do that? So super
that's it.
interesting.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay, and so you headed in this direction, really started immersing yourself in voice tech. What was the journey like from that to creating an online course?
Yeah. So, given the fact that we were sitting in these boardrooms with all these different companies and speaking with their UX guys, UI guys, design engineers, seeing a lot of the questions they had with regards to voice, we started to gather, if you like, a whole array of questions and the answers that we gave. We started to develop frameworks and really started to develop principles for conversational AI strategy and design. And what I realized is that there's really these two islands. There's an island of voice technology, and then there's an island of brands. And in between these two islands is this ocean of unknown. So I
Mm,
thought, okay, how can I bridge these two islands where I can provide these frameworks, these principles, all the way from where does voice fit into our digital strategy, all the way to where does voice fit into our customer journey, to what sounds should we have? Should we have different voices for different use cases? Should we be on a mobile device, a voice assistant on a mobile device, or is it for a smart speaker? Is it there to replace other interfaces, or is it there to supplement other interfaces? What is the emotional connection? All of these different questions that we were addressing, not only for brands, but actually going out there speaking at a lot of events that were now hosting experts on voice. We were not experts, but we knew more than the average person because the average person didn't know much about it. All of those learnings, all of those presentations, after around 2 years, I realized, wow, I've got a lot of content here. And I kind of understood where brands were finding it difficult to
right.
adopt voice. It was the early stages, really. A lot of brands, unfortunately, jumped into making voice applications, but they didn't jump into the strategy of why I should have a voice application and where in my consumer journey it should fit in.
Right, right,
So I had all this content. I had a colleague of mine out in Israel, Adi Mazorkaria, fantastic Google Assistant expert, strategic expert, corporate innovation expert. She was doing the same thing in Israel. So I said, hey, I've got the content here. You've got the content there. Why don't we get together? And we kind of know what questions these brands have for this early stage of voice exploration. Let's structure it into a course. We ended up hosting it on Udemy, and soon we're going to have additional versions outside of Udemy and on other platforms, as well as
right.
our standalone features. And that's really where we took the learnings and the work that we had done in other contexts and formulated it in the form of a online course, which now I think is about 350 students in 11 months, so just under a year. Our target was 50 in a year. So we're ecstatic with having 350 students in under a year.
Fantastic. Okay, and I mean, this sounds like a fascinating course for a student going in. What sort of transformation happens for them before and after the course? What does that look like for the student?
I'm glad you asked that because that's exactly the question I asked right at the beginning. I was thinking, who's coming in and how are they going out? The course is really designed for UXers, UIers, designers, strategists, digital transformation people, brand managers, marketers, engineers, anybody and everybody who is involved in some form of technology, student level all the way to senior level. The
Right.
idea is we're here to pitch the benefit of voice for brands that have utilized it thus far and for brands that we think should utilize it. And we've given frameworks for these students to go away and apply. So it's almost like a template framework where they can apply it to their current product, their technology, their business, their brand. And through applying these principles and frameworks to their current situation, whatever they are, even if they're a student just coming up with a voice application because they fancy doing so, they will then be able to go away and have a strategic uh, foundation for whatever voice application that they will be designing and developing. Because we realize there's a ton of designers out there, there are a ton of developers out there, but there are not many good strategies out there. And you could have the best voice application designed beautifully, developed beautifully, but if the strategy is not there of why the hell it should be even in your portfolio of digital products, if the strategy is not there, no one's going to know about it, and
Yeah, yeah.
it might not be a right fit. So we really started at the early levels, first principles really of voice exploration. So the idea is that through the course, the student will come away not equipped with answers, but equipped with knowing what questions to ask to their own product teams to be able to determine whether or not voice is a fit for whatever projects they're working on.
It makes a lot of sense because I guess voice isn't always the right fit, right? And it's
Exactly,
quite a challenge to identify when and
exactly.
where the technology should be applied.
This is it. At the beginning of the industry, there were voice first champions who believe that voice is the cure for everything, including cancer. Left, right, and center, voice will do everything. It reminds me of the microwave. When the microwave first came out, everyone was like, "That's it. We don't need stoves. We don't need fire. We don't need anything. The microwave will do everything." But actually, no, microwave ended up being another element of the kitchen, not to replace other interfaces, but as a supplementary interface. And that's exactly what voice is. It's there not to replace the screen in all circumstances and not to replace mobile, web, etc. It's there to supplement our interactions with those interfaces. And sometimes it can be a standalone voice only interface. So I always say we push an agenda of convenience first rather than voice first. So depending on the situation within the consumer journey, we'll try and find where voice fits in to be the most convenient for that particular use case.
I really like that microwave comparison. That's great.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's Charles Cadbury, a friend of mine who came up with it. He's a CEO of Say It Now.
nice. Okay, and then the students who are going through this course or attempting to study similar materials, what are the most important things that students should be focusing on to be picking up the skills that they need?
The main focus, as I always say, is principles. Principles, principles, principles. We tend to get bogged down in detail in all facets of life, not just with our work. And sometimes it's good to zoom out and try to see are your assumptions right, because we can go ahead with an assumption and devote a lot of time and resources to something which comes laden with assumptions that we later find out, damn, that was just an assumption, or a fundamental part of why we did this was based on a faulty assumption. So the main thing I try to get across is really, first of all, to constantly check, just like the cell. It has cell cycle checkpoints. At every stage of the cell cycle, there is a checkpoint to see, okay, what I've done in the last stage, is this good to go? Or is it mutated and we shouldn't continue with it? If it's mutated, start from beginning, scratch, forget it. If we're okay so far, let's continue. So there's this inbuilt cell cycle mechanism checkpoint, uh, uh, you know, mentality that I try to instill within the course. so that before you even think about designing or developing a voice application, to constantly check that this voice solution is actually a solution for your use case or not. So coming with a macro viewpoint is one of the hardest things you can teach a student to do. It's very difficult for myself sometimes because we love to get on to the next stage of things.
Yeah.
So coming in with that open mind of constantly zooming out at every assumption point and making sure that there is this coherent structure or stepped process to what you're doing, that's what I would say. So a macro view really is the main requirement for the course.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Any tips? I find myself making the same mistake sometimes in my own day-to-day work. Any tips on how to adopt the macro view when it's beneficial?
Yeah, study philosophy.
Right? Okay.
Philosophy. As I said, I've recently published a book on Jewish philosophy, and something philosophy has taught me. If you think about it, so philosophy is all about macro questions. It's
Yeah.
taking us out of the mundane micro elements of our life and saying, why are we even here? What are we even supposed to do? So philosophy was very helpful in providing, the framework really to sometimes zoom out. Why are you doing this voice application in the first place? Where is it going to fit? What is the meaning behind it? What are you going to gain from it? What are the objectives? I would recommend everybody, for every facet of life, again, not just for work, to spend some time studying philosophers of days gone, as well as current philosophers, from Sam Harris to Jordan Peterson, etc., etc., to really get a better view of the big questions, because those things do subconsciously impact a lot of the work that you do as well, and allow you to have a macro vision in everything from work to relationships.
That's a really great answer, and I expect students of yours will benefit from having that philosophical element blended in with the course material. So that's really great.
I hope so.
Okay, so moving on from the specifics of the course and more to career development and perhaps people who are thinking, I'd quite like to get into voice tech. What advice would you give to those people who?
So I think the main thing is to look at emerging technologies out there. We're seeing a paradigm shift in our interactions with technology, very much so. The early stages of tech development, the criteria that we were working towards as engineers, developers, designers, the criteria were about accuracy, were about speed, efficiency. But now we're living in an era of technology where the criteria, we're talking about technology that, understands us, technology that's empathetic, that we can trust, devices that we can trust. So it's moving from this cold, left side, rational, view of technology to this warm and fuzzy, emotional right side of the brain criteria, such as empathy, trust, etc. And when we look at that humanization, if you like, or this evolution of the human computer interaction, it's worth noting what are the technologies out there that can meet both of these criteria. And voice, I think, is ideal because it meets both of the criteria. It can be a efficient experience, it can be an accurate experience, it can be an experience that removes friction and provides the speed that a customer might need at that given time. But at the same time, voice is packed with emotional cues.
Yeah.
So you can have a trustworthy conversation with somebody when you hear their voice. There could be a voice that's empathetic, a voice that you trust. So I think that's something that really attracted me to commit to some sort of career in conversational AI, voice technology as a whole. I say conversational AI is the umbrella term for voice tech and chatbots, because
Right.
chatbots are also under the umbrella of conversational AI, but obviously you don't have a voice in that sense. So that really intrigued me because we're seeing the interactions between emotion and technology. We've seen the tests has been out there. The clinical trial has gone on for these decades of the impact of technology on our mental states. And we're starting to see that within a 5 minute span on our mobile phones, so many emotions are triggered, from a text that we may receive, which makes us feel all warm and fuzzy, to a reminder we receive that makes us angry, to feelings of surprise when we get a random notification. So in a 5 minute span on our devices, we have a emotional cocktail. So given that reality, what kind of interfaces are out there, or technologies or devices out there that can help us manage our emotions a little bit better, that are a little bit friendlier on our emotions. And I think voice sits really nicely there, because with voice you can really impact emotional states for the good. So you can still get the technological things done as you wish to do with all your devices, but doing them with an empathy and emotional intelligence from the side of the device, if you like. It may provide human computer interactions that are a little bit more pleasing to the mental states of not only our youth, but especially our elderly and beyond.
Very true. Yeah. No, I mean, you've certainly helped me to see conversational AI from a new perspective. It's very
It makes you
intriguing.
think, why aren't I in it already, right?
It
It
certainly
makes you
does.
think.
It certainly does. So some food for thought for listeners.
Indeed, indeed. Whenever I speak with people about it, they're like, damn, I should get into conversational AI. But no, definitely an exciting space with all the virtual reality, augmented reality. At the end of the day, with AI, robots of the future, we are going to have an AI population. How are we going to communicate with these people with these devices, with these robots? Through our voice. How are they going to be communicating? With their voice. So at the end of the day, when you see the Google in your living room, when you see the Alexa in your living room, these are just the babies, if you like, of a future AI robot population. These are just the early, it's almost desensitizing us to communicating with robots of the future. Because at the end of the day, whatever brain that Alexa or Google has will be the same, well, much more advanced brain that the AI robot population will have in the future. So that's why it's exciting, because we're going to be communicating with this population. We may not, but our kids will be, without a shadow of a doubt, in the next 20 years. And they're going to be communicating with their voice and with conversational AI. So it's a very exciting space to be in, because it's almost setting the standard for our interactions with this new population.
100%. Great stuff. So
99.9%. Nothing's 100%, my friend.
great stuff. Okay, well, look, I mean, I'm sure we could go on for a long time on this. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, but we're about at time. So, in terms of people who want to go and learn more about you and take your course, where can people go to find out more?
So I would recommend going on my website. So it's sinakahen.com, SINAKAHEN.com. And on there, you have access to a lot of the content. The course, obviously, there's a link through there in the book. And please do reach out. I love hearing from everybody and anybody, especially things related to conversational AI, medtech, corporate innovation, as well as philosophy. So really, really thank you for having me, and really looking forward to speaking to the audience at a future date.
Brilliant. Well, we'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. But Sina, thank you ever so much for coming on. Really enjoyed our chat.
Likewise, thank you.
All right, bye for now.